Hi guys, it's Margaret Floyd Barry here with Eat Naked, and my job is to help you feel better in your body than you even knew possible. So today we are going to talk all about lectins, and specifically the program laid out in this book, The Plant Paradox by Dr. Stephen Gundry. Now, the reason why I want to talk to you today about this book is that I've had so many clients come to me in a bit of a panic, wondering if they need to pull all lectin-rich foods out of their diet after having read this book. So I wanted to see what they were talking about, see if I agreed with what he has to say, and then share some of my thoughts with you here today. Now, before we're going to talk about lectins in particular and this book in particular, I just want to give a bit of a caveat about this idea of these generic types of diets generally, be it the plant paradox diet, something like the GAPS diet, autoimmune paleo protocol. There's so many different really good therapeutic diets, but they all have their necessary limitations, and I include any of the dietary recommendations I make in my book, Eat Naked, along with this. So what happens as authors when we're writing a book generally for the public, what we have to do is we have to find those recommendations that will apply to as many people as possible. But necessarily what this is going to mean is that it's going to work really, really well for some people, and it's just not going to cut it for other people. There's going to be more to the story because we don't know what's going on with you bio-individually. So your body might be asking for something that's exactly part of what this protocol does, or it might be asking for something different, and there's no way that we can know that. So we just give our recommendations to the best of our ability and hope that most of it sticks. So that's going to be a universal thing, and this is why as a practitioner I'm always recommending that if your budget allows it, that you work one-on-one with a functional practitioner to do testing to figure out exactly what your body is asking for, and then you can customize your diet and your supplement protocol to specifically what your body needs. So that's just some bigger picture clinical context here for you. And now let's talk about this topic, which is lectins. So lectins, what are they? Basically, in a nutshell, and this is a very high-level description of them, but basically lectins are anti-nutrients that you find in foods like grains, legumes, seeded vegetables and fruits. So I'm talking about things like squashes and zucchinis and tomatoes and cucumbers. So yes, things that a lot of us are eating a lot of. And these anti-nutrients do damage to the gut lining and essentially create inflammation and trigger and engage the immune system. And we know that when we have a situation where the immune system is chronically engaged and when there's chronic levels of inflammation, that is sort of the groundwork for all sorts of disease, whether that be autoimmune issues, digestive issues, stubborn weight gain that just won't go away, cardiovascular issues, basically you name it. Inflammation and immune activation like this are at the root of almost every chronic issue that plagues us. Now, a lot of these foods we've been eating for literally thousands of years. So why is it that suddenly now we're having these issues? Well, as Dr. Gundry points out really well, it's kind of a perfect storm of situations. So we have all of these other stressors on our gut. So things like, even just the life stress that we're under right now, the chronic amount of antibiotics and the high dosing of antibiotics that people are experiencing, the overuse of things like NSAIDs, the non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, things like ibuprofen, exposure to blue light. There's a whole host of things that are causing stress on our systems overall and on our intestines specifically. So in this weakened state, when you add an irritant like a lectin to that environment, it's going to have that much more of an impact negatively than it would if we were otherwise really healthy and robust. So let's talk a little bit more about these anti-nutrients called lectins and what they're actually doing. So if you think about either a little grain or the seed in a tomato, what is the biological purpose or role of that little seed? It's not to feed us, it's to grow another plant. And so these grains and these beans and these seeds, they all have protective mechanisms in them to prevent them from breaking down prematurely and to really enable them to grow and proliferate. And so those protective mechanisms are really challenging on our digestive system, and that's what is creating this issue in our small intestine. To compound this, we're not preparing these foods the way we were traditionally. So we're not soaking our grains the way we would have done historically. And we're not peeling and de-seeding our tomatoes the way I realized my grandmother always used to do, and I never really understood why. I don't think she knew anything about lectins, but there was something intuitive there that knew that this was the part of that fruit that wasn't actually healthful. So, so you add all of these things together and it creates this kind of perfect storm of issues that can, as I said, create this breeding ground for inflammation and immune activation, and thus lay the foundation for so many other health issues. Now, it's important to remember, and one of the things that Dr. Gundry points out in this book is that it's not just limited to the direct consumption of these foods, but it's also eating anything like, for example, conventionally raised beef, fed lots of corn and soy, both of which are very high lectin foods. And there's that saying, you are what you eat. Well, it's you are what you eat eats too. So, so you have to think not just of what you're directly consuming, but if you're consuming anything, for example, from an animal, you have to think about what that animal consumed as well. So it's kind of a bigger picture thing. Now, Dr. Gundry's solution, of course, is to remove the lectins from the diet in this sort of two-phased diet. The first part of it is a 3-day cleanse where primarily you're eating tons of greens and cruciferous vegetables and a little bit of select proteins. And then the second phase of the diet is a longer phase of about 6 weeks where you're very drastically reducing those high lectin foods and just being very conscious of the types of starches and foods that you're consuming. You're very much designed to optimize the health of the microbiome, which is that, bacteria ecology that lives in our gut and keeps us nice and healthy and strong if it's doing really well. So it's designed very much to feed that and to minimize any kind of damage that's happening to the gut lining and to help it repair. And then he has a phase where you can slowly reintroduce some of these higher lectin foods and see basically how much you tolerate. And my husband and I have been playing with this diet for a little bit. We've been on it mostly for the last sort of 3 or 4 weeks, and I'll say I wanted to try it because I wanted to see how easy it is to do and what it feels like to be on it. And it's not, for us, it wasn't that hard, but I'll also acknowledge that for us, we're coming from a mostly paleo style of eating where we mostly limit our grains and our legumes and starches already. Certainly, we felt fabulous on it, and we always do when we really drastically cut out those types of foods. And could that be the lectins? Absolutely. And it could also be just the fact that they're a higher starch and they're harder on the digestion overall. The thing that was probably the most noticeable for us was reducing some of these seeded vegetables and fruits. So things like cucumbers and peppers and tomatoes and zucchini and squash, which, for those of us in the more paleo communities, those are things and foods that we tend to rely on a lot as alternatives. For example, zoodles instead of noodles and things like that. So that's definitely been a change. We both feel really good, but quite frankly, neither of us were that sick to begin with. So it's hard, we're not the best test for this. Would I recommend this diet? Now, I agree with almost everything that Dr. Lundy has to say. As I said at the outset, my preferred approach, if you were one of my private clients, would be to do some specific testing to find out very specifically what's inflammatory in your body, to find out specifically what's going on in your gut and heal it that way. But if you don't have the resources to work privately with somebody like me, then this could be a really good starting point for you. The one caveat I have is that it is pretty restrictive. And if you're coming from a standard American diet, it might feel pretty overwhelming to go from sort of, your normal carb-rich, processed foods-rich type of diet all the way to a diet like this, where you really have to be cooking almost everything yourself. And it's very challenging to stick with this protocol when you're eating out, if not, maybe not completely impossible, but certainly quite challenging. A couple of other things that he mentions that I just want to make note of here is that he does recommend limiting protein intake to 8 ounces or less of protein a day, and he is very cautious around the consumption of things like red meat, so beef, bison, lamb, pork is not officially red meat, but that category of animal, simply because of what those animals are often eating. So he does limit the intake of that significantly and prioritizes the lighter, leaner types of proteins like turkey and chicken and fish and seafood, which is, not a bad recommendation at all. And the one recommendation that I have to say I really did disagree with was simply, he talks about some supplementation, and he talked very specifically about vitamin D and liking to see levels in blood work over 100, which in my professional opinion is actually at a toxic level. So I wouldn't be dosing the vitamin D as high as he does. But really, with everything else, I think this could be an excellent starting point for someone. And if it really resonates with you, I suggest giving the diet a try. There's a lot more mechanics that he goes into, a lot more technical details. So this is the book, The Plant Paradox, Dr. Stephen Gundry. We'll put a link to it below here. If you have any questions on it, if you've read the book and you have any specific questions for me, please post them in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them. And if there's any other books that you would like me to read and review, please also leave that in the comments, and I will do so there as well. Thank you so much. Have a fabulous and healthy day.